Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome to the channel. There's been a lot of controversy recently surrounding MMA judging, and it's reignited the debate. It seems like we have every couple months. How do we fix MMA judging? And there's been solutions proposed by MMA media, which is then regurgitated by the MMA community as a whole, which honestly, I think are completely ridiculous solutions that would not help at all. We're going to talk about those. But not only am I going to say that, oh, these guys don't have the answers, I'm going to propose some solutions that I believe would have an actual impact on the accuracy of MMA judging. And we're also going to discuss something that you could do to help improve judging in MMA in the next couple weeks that I've never heard anyone suggest. And then also we're going to discuss there is two groups that I believe exasperate the problem of MMA judging, exasperate the controversy surrounding some of these decisions that I believe deserve some blame, but are never ever talked about by anyone. So we're going to talk about them in this video as well. So first off, starting off, what is a robbery in MMA? Well, before the term was perverted by the MMA community, it used to be a robbery was one fighter clearly wins, and the judges give the scorecards to the other fighter. And, that's the way it's always been. But over the past however many years, some people and a large portion of the MMA community have kind of warped the term robbery into any decision in an MMA fight that you do not agree with. But we're going to operate under the original definition. How do we fix robberies in terms of one fighter winning the fight clear as day and then not getting the decision on judges' scorecards? Because that is a true robbery that does still happen in today's day and age, even though there's a lot of outrage about close decisions. Now, there is some solutions that have been presented by the MMA community, by a lot of MMA media personalities, Ariel Helwani being one of them. And a lot of these solutions, I believe, would outright not only not help judging as a whole, I believe they would have a negative impact on the sport. First being, an Ariel Helwani is one of the biggest kind of proponents of this solution, which is not a real solution, and that is open scoring. For those of you who don't know, what is open scoring? Open scoring is the judges rendering their decisions round by round. So by the time the second round starts, the audience, the fighters, the coaches all know who won the first round on the judges' scorecards, okay? And I don't get in any way, shape, or form that open scoring would help with judging, because it's just going to let us know sooner about terrible decisions. And I believe there'll be some negative impacts to that, because if you have a close fight and one fighter wins the first 3 rounds and they already know about it because of open scoring, and it's a championship fight where you have rounds 4 and 5, well, guess what they're going to do in rounds 4 or 5? They're going to coast. So open scoring, not only does it not help in any way, shape, or form, and if you think it does, let me know down in the comments, is there something I'm missing? Because you're just getting the same scorecards earlier. I think it has a negative impact. The second one that we keep hearing time and time again is we need more former fighters to be judges. First off, there's nothing stopping former fighters from applying to become judges with these commissions. They're not doing it. But also, you don't need to be a former fighter to judge a fight. You don't need to be a former fighter to read the judging criteria and render a decision. That's just completely ridiculous to even act as if you definitely need to be a former fighter to be able to look at a fight and determine who wins each round based on a written criteria. It just makes no sense. And on top of that, because I'm not necessarily against it because of that, okay, that maybe former fighters can render perfect scorecards. But the other thing that a lot of people don't take into account, what about the biases some of these former fighters have? They trained with this guy, they hated this guy, they don't like this coach, they don't like that coach, they love this coach. There's some conflict of interest in having former fighters judge fights. And also, you don't know, it's going to be impossible to untangle the web of potential relationships that former fighters have. And you're not going to be able to know what kind of bias they may or may not have. So I just think throwing, oh, we need former fighters in there. First off, the former fighters don't want to do it. Second off, probably at least 50% of them probably have CTE. You look at Michael Bisping. Would you want him scoring a fight? He's a former fighter. He's only got one eye. And he doesn't know how to judge a fight based on the criteria by any means. And I just think the former fighters argument, not only do you not need former fighters, I believe it opens up a can of worms of conflict of interest and bias towards certain fighters, bias towards certain coaches, whether it's for or against. And I think it creates a bigger issue than we already have. So I think that solution, completely ridiculous. Then the last one that I keep seeing proposed, Ariel Helwani's one of the guys that keeps regurgitating this over and over again, and I hear it from the MMA community as a whole. These judges need to answer questions from the MMA media. This is the same MMA media that can't even ask a simple follow-up question to Dana White. When he blatantly says something false, they can't even follow up on it because they're scared. You want these same guys that are probably, just on the payroll of Dana White. I mean, Ariel Helwani, the one saying this, was on the payroll for Dana White in the UFC for years. Self-admittedly, I knew it long before he admitted it, but self-admittedly a shill for the UFC. Oh, we definitely need Ariel Helwani asking questions to these judges on how they render their decisions. That's definitely going to help. What is that going to achieve? Even if they could ask decent questions, what is that going to achieve? What is Ariel Helwani asking a certain judge? Well, why'd you score this round for this fighter when he disagrees with it and he says, well, I don't agree with that. Well, you're not the judge. So I just don't get how the horrible MMA media, which honestly, I wouldn't want them asking me any questions about anything because they're incompetent. Most of them don't make that much money, so they're kind of checked out of their jobs. A lot of them I see on some of these big name MMA media websites, it looks like they're being held hostage and forced to cover the sport. And you want them asking the judges question post-event? They got to answer to the media? I think that's a completely ridiculous solution. And again, even in the most ideal world where you get the best possible questions from the most well-trained MMA media you could ever imagine, what does that solve? So, for example, you have round 4 where they scored it for Amir Albazi over Kai Kara-France. Most people thought round 4 went to Kai Kara-France. What if the judge, you ask him, well, how did you come to that round 4 decision? Well, I thought he landed the better shots. Let's say he says that. Okay, well, that's his opinion. That's what he saw. He's sitting cage side. You don't know his point of view. It just doesn't move towards getting any real answers. So I just think that one is completely played out. It's completely regurgitated. It's been regurgitated for years and years and years and years. Oh, the judges need to answer to the media, the big bad MMA media who can't ask a single follow-up question to Dana White on a blatantly false statement. Oh, now they're going to interview the judges. Yeah, we're really going to get some great answers out of them. And then also, how are you going to put that type of public pressure on the judges? So then essentially you have MMA media, which is dictated a lot of the times by cult-like following fan bases. They're attempting to sway judges' decisions in future fights, because if they judge a fight a certain way and then you don't like it and they get a lot of shit about it, then all of a sudden now you're essentially intimidating them into the next fight. Well, I got to judge it the way they think I should judge it the next time instead of based on the criteria. Like, think about that. It makes no sense to put public pressure on them in that way. I just think it's totally ridiculous. But that begs the question, how do we fix MMA judging? Because if none of those solutions work, how are we going to fix it? Well, I think the first thing we need is the commissions themselves to offer better education on the scoring criteria. Because if every judge understands the scoring criteria and they judge the fight based on the scoring criteria, then theoretically, we should get better judges' decisions, more accurate judges' decisions. So first off, we need more education regarding the MMA criteria. I know there's a lot of MMA media members online who like to pretend they're the end-all, be-all of the MMA scoring criteria and this and that. It's ridiculous. They act like they take one class so they know everything about the judging scoring criteria. And we have these scoring criteria snobs who read it one time and think they know everything. We need the commission as a whole to better educate their judges. I think that would help. I think that goes without saying. But also, I believe another solution that you could put forth immediately, I think we need more judges. Do 5 judges. I think 5 judges would help, because if you have 1, 2 bad judges, you can still get the correct decision. And I think the more judges you have, I'm not saying we need to do 13 judges, but if we do 5 judges, there's a couple bad judges, we still get the right decision, because you get 2 bad judges out of 5, we still get the 3 with the right decision. So I think more judges could help the accuracies of MMA decisions. And I really wish they would explore that, because right now we have 3. And I just think, expanding the number of judges would help greatly. And I think it would help weed out some of the stupidity from some of the Chris Lees and the Saul Diamatos, who we've known produce bad scorecards. And also, I think internally, there needs to be, we hear this term accountability when it comes to judges interviewing with MMA media members. The commission as a whole, I think they're a bit incompetent. We've seen it in the past with the Nick Diaz suspension and stuff like that. But we need to see them based on the actual scoring criteria. They need to have someone who's like ahead of the scoring criteria, and they need to have them holding these judges accountable. And when they make a bad decision, they need to review it with them internally, and then they need to maybe pull them off of certain fights and maybe put them back to, some of the lower level amateur fights rather than big main events in the UFC. I think that makes sense as well. You need to have accountability internally and not with the MMA media as a whole. It just doesn't make any sense. And also, what I would love, we keep hearing, we want answers from these judges. Another solution I think they should do is, I think maybe each judge needs to submit, whether it be a couple sentences of explaining why they scored the fight the way they did, and then that is released to the public. Okay, we don't have Ariel Helwani or any of these other MMA journalists attempting to grill judges. We just get a press release. This is what they saw. This is why they scored the fight this certain way. Now, another solution, because I have plenty of solutions, and I think not one of these solutions is going to solve the problem completely, but I think if you enacted all of these, I think we would increase the accuracy of scorecards greatly. The other solution that I have is we need to have judges that are not sitting ringside. The ringside view is not great by any means. If they're fighting in a certain section of the octagon, you might not be able to see it, or the cage, depending on what organization it is. Their view may be obstructed. So I think maybe you do 3 judges cage side, and then you do 2 judges in the back. And if you're going to have judges watching in the back, absolutely no commentary. And then I think you need 5, 6 camera angles that are just stock camera angles for every single judge, because we can't have the UFC broadcast dictating the camera angles. So they need to see every camera angle the UFC has on the cage on multiple screens with no commentary in a dead silent room, and render their scorecards that way. And what I would love them honestly to do as another part of this solution, maybe have 3 judges cage side and 3 judges in the back, okay? And I know you're going to say, well, that's an even amount of judges. You could have 3-3. Forget about the 3 in the back. Forget about their scorecards. But I would like to see them render scorecards that do not matter. And then I would like to see some long-term data, whether it be 6 months, a year. Give us some data. How do those judges' scorecards compared with the ones sitting ringside? I would love to know that. And then see, okay, did these guys who are watching it on the monitors in the back, in the, let's say we have a head of judging in general for the athletic commissions, are these judges' scorecards deemed more accurate based on the head of the commission or the head of the judging department or whatever you want to call it with the commission? I would love to see that comparison, even if you totally ignored them for 6 months and they didn't have an actual effect on who won or who lost. The other solution I have, I think we need more 10-10 rounds. There is so many rounds that I believe are dead even, and instead of flipping a coin and saying, oh, this guy gets the round, that guy loses the round, we get a 10-9. I think we need more 10-10s. If you look back at Kai Kara France and Amir Albazi, just because it's the most recent example, you could do 1 and 2 10-10 rounds. And then you have the third round, you would give to Amir Albazi 10-9. Then you would have the fourth round, and I know in this case, you have a judge that gave the fourth round to Amir Albazi, but then the fourth and fifth round would be 10-9 for Kai Kara France, and then in turn, Kai Kara France would win because he would get rounds 4 and 5, where Amir Albazi would just get round 3. And I think with these 10-10 rounds, you would also get more draws. There are so many fights that I could say, okay, this was an even fight. I think there needs to be more draws in MMA in general. There are so many fights like where I don't even know, like I can't even definitively say, okay, this guy's a better fighter, that guy's a better fighter. There's so many razor close fights where it probably should just be called a draw. And the reason they don't do that is because the UFC definitely doesn't want it, but also it leaves the fans unsatisfied. So I do understand it, but at the same time, if Kai Kara France versus Amir Albazi was deemed a draw, I think there would still be people complaining, but not nowhere near the level of people who are complaining currently based on, Amir Al-Bazzi getting the win. Because you look at the first 3 rounds of that fight, I keep using it as an example. First 2 rounds were razor close. Third round was Al-Bazzi's. Fourth and fifth should have went to Kai Kara-France. But the fourth round was actually closer than people made it out to be. I thought Amir Al-Bazzi lost the round when I rewatched it, but it was much closer than, people made it out to be, and also the stats made it out to be. Now, regarding the people who were to blame, because what we've gone to, and I touched on it at the beginning of the video, we've gone from a fight where a fighter clearly wins and the other fighter gets the decision. Let's go back in another example. Ross Pearson versus Diego Sanchez was a clear robbery. Ross Pearson won the fight. Diego Sanchez got the decision. So in terms of that one's cold cut. There's nothing we can do. We need to complain about that. But some of these other fights, Kai Kara-France versus Amir Al-Bazzi, Sean Strickland versus Jared Cannonier, Jan Blachowicz versus Magomed Ankalaev, which did end up being a draw. I think there are 2 groups outside of the commission and outside of the judges that deserve some blame regarding blowing up these decisions and making them so controversial and calling every fight that they don't agree with a robbery. And it's so annoying. And the first group is the group that pays too close attention to the UFC commentary. The UFC commentary sometimes is so biased. They were acting like Israel Adesanya was beating Jan Blachowicz when he was clearly losing. And you look at the Kai Kara-France Amir Al-Bazzi fight, they were acting like Kai Kara-France has us in the bag. Look at the stats. The UFC keeps hyping up the stats. Those stats are meaningless. And just to prove how meaningless they are, I went back and counted the round stats, the striking stats for round 4, which supposedly was like 27-5 in favor of Kai Kara-France. 5 strikes for Amir Al-Bazzi. I went back and recounted it. It was at least 10 strikes for Amir Al-Bazzi, and it could have been 12, but 2 of them were kind of iffy. I didn't go back and watch them in slow-mo, but either way, that's a 100% increase in the number of number of strikes he landed compared to the stats. So the UFC broadcast and their overhyping of stats that are wildly inaccurate, and the fans that just eat that up and just agree with whatever the broadcast says, they're to blame for hyping up every single fight that they don't agree with the scorecards as a robbery. And also, you notice this usually only happens with MMA main events or UFC main events. There's a lot of undercard fights where I see questionable decisions all the time. We don't see the outrage there. And another reason, and another group that I think is to blame for making these robberies so controversial and so crazy, I think is the betting and gambling MMA community. Because these people put money on these fights, you have these razor close fights, and then you think, okay, this guy should probably win, and you have $500 on it or $300 on it, then the other guy gets the decision. They raise hell because they have money on it. They just lost $200, $300, $500, maybe even in the thousands. And they lost it based on a close fight where they thought they should have won. And now they lost money on it. And I think there's a large portion of the MMA community that are gamblers. And they're upset because they lost money. So they blow it out of proportion. And they act like it's the worst decision they've ever seen because they lost a bet. And they get too emotional behind it because they're like, oh, well, Kai Kara-France should have definitely won. I would have won my money. I would have made $700, and now I'm out of $300. So I think the gambling community is a big factor in blowing a lot of these decisions out of proportion. Now, the other thing I want to mention, the last thing I want to mention in this video, is what can you personally do to help improve some of the judging explicitly in Nevada? I think in Nevada you can have an effect. Because I was doing some research, I was looking at the Nevada State Athletic Commission, and they have their monthly meeting. There is room for public comment at the Nevada State Athletic Commission meeting. You can publicly comment. You can call in, look, here's the teleconference number. You can call in, and then this is from the previous agenda, so the phone conference ID is wrong. I've circled it all on this graphic here. You can call in at the beginning of their monthly meeting, and you can also call in at the end of their meeting when they have a time period allowed it for public comment. Nobody ever calls into these. So if you really disagree with the decision, start calling into these Nevada State Athletic Commission meetings every single month. The next one, I believe, is June 20th. And you can go to their website, you can pull up their agenda, you can get the teleconference option number, which I've already circled in front of you. That's the actual number, but the other number will change. You'll have to get that for the agenda for that date and start calling. I'm not endorsing harassing anyone, but call and let your complaints be heard. If the MMA community causes enough ruckus and calls up and says, these are ridiculous scorecards. This is an indefensible round given to this fighter. Guess what? When they start hearing enough of that, and again, I'm not saying you need to harass them, but just let your thoughts be known. When they start getting enough pushback, that's the only way they'll ever make any changes. And if they start hearing enough pushback, maybe they'll do 5 judges. They start hearing enough pushback, maybe they'll do a couple judges in the back room watching on monitors. They will do things to innovate and improve. Where right now, they're sheltered. They're sheltered. They don't hear anybody complaining about it unless they get on Twitter or start watching MMA YouTube content. They're not going to hear people complaining about it. They just, okay, they move on. It's next fight up, next fight to judge. It doesn't matter to them because they don't hear any of the outrage truly, because instead of people actually doing something, all they do is just go on Twitter and tweet. And I think if people start calling them and start letting them know, look, this is an indefensible scorecard, we need answers, and it inconveniences them enough, guess what? They will start making changes for the better. But let me know what you guys think. What are some things we could use to improve judging in MMA? Let me know down in the comments. Let me know what you thought of my potential solutions to the problem. Don't forget to like the video. Don't forget to subscribe. And thank you so much for watching.